Dr. Beamer's 6th visit to Unitec. Many of you will have been to her presentations over the last 6 years, and you will know that she's a professor of marketing at California State University, LA. Jenny, there's a seat right in the front row. As always, we've been delighted by Linda's insights and her advice, particularly in the area of communication research. She's certainly seen some changes since her first visit here in 1999, when we were just introducing our first postgraduate programs in the School of Communication. We had 4 students then. We have over 40 now. Some of those over 40, not odd, but postgraduate students had the special privilege this year of having one-on-one time with Dr. Beamer to discuss their proposals and their dissertations. And that's been a very important part of what we do. You will know that Linda's specialist area is in the field of intercultural business communication. She's co-author of a textbook that's not only used here at Unitec in our courses, but also as far afield as the Netherlands, as we found when we were negotiating with an institution just some weeks ago. They were very impressed to find the author of the textbook was one of Unitec's visiting professors. Currently, she's fulfilling a year-long engagement as the president of the Association for Business Communication, and that's an international organisation that some of you may know for its support of research, teaching and consulting in the field. She's also an associate editor for the JBC, the Journal of Business Communication. Her topic today is How Do They Figure That? Exploring what makes sense to people in different cultures. I'm looking forward to that. Please join me in welcoming Linda Beamer.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for that introduction. I think I'll just let people who are wanting to find chairs have a seat. And someone can have this chair. I'll come back home. Well, I wanted to talk today about something that's been an interest of mine, and in fact some of you have heard me say bits of this before, which is how culture and cognition intersect. And my interest in this has stemmed from many years of connection with intercultural business communication research. One of my early experiences was when I was a graduate student many years ago in London. I was in Oxford actually, listening to the radio, BBC radio, and there was an interviewer talking to people who had traveled to Europe, especially France and Spain. And one old dear who was being asked about her experiences said, well, you know, it's a very funny thing. In France, everything is very nice, but they call water low. She said, it's really water, but they call it low. So the identity of it was not in any question in her mind. It was just this strange, why would they call water low? L-O-W, I assume was what was in her mind. We're pretty used to people not understanding each other across cultures because of language. And we are used to people not understanding one another across cultures because of social organization and institutions, the things that we find out when we travel. People have different food, different customs. But we also come up against the fact that what makes sense in another culture, what adds up, what constitutes meaningfulness in another culture is going to be different, driven by culture. And that's what I really would like to talk about today. We know that culture is the basis for what makes sense, what adds up, what is logical, and what is reasonable. And at the same time, culture also is going to be responsible for what we find unreasonable, our own cultural view. So I'm going to begin today with this very simple premise that we need to be aware of the fact that people think logically in ways that are different. They're culturally driven, and that what is logical in one culture may not be at all logical in another. And that what seems unreasonable in another culture may in fact capture what is meaningful in that culture for people of that culture. So it's a kind of basic notion, but one that I think is kind of easy to forget. Very often we think, if we just explain our logic clearly enough, people will get it. If we just find the right words, they'll see what we mean. Evidence abounds to the contrary, of course. What seems a logical argument doesn't necessarily add up to someone from another culture. Think of the way that national decision makers, I confess George Bush is very much in my mind here, how they expect other nations' leaders to fall in with our reasoning. We came to Iraq with our bombs and tanks to make you free, don't you see? We reduced your buildings to rubble, we thinned out your population, and now you're free. With our guns. Here's the problem. Since we believe that people everywhere share the same genetic code, have the same mental equipment, the same physical brain structure, we all process information in the same way. We think because people in all societies have some social structure for prosperity, we all use the same rational processes when we talk about achieving those goals. But it just isn't so. What makes sense in one culture is not guaranteed to make sense in another culture. Intercultural communication, especially for business, will be successful when we recognize that being logical is culturally based. So I want to give you some examples from 4 cultures, including the general kind of culture I grew up in, about what makes sense to people. What do people from very different cultures think makes a good argument? How do they gain compliance in various cultures? How do they construct ideas in order to convince? What are the fundamental principles on which they base their reasoning? I'm sorry. The deeper question is about how culture affects cognition. Analysis of an argument that is logical to members of a specific culture is a way to understand the cognitive processes in that culture. So I'd like to start with ancient Greece, which is where our sense of logic comes from. Classical Greek culture, dating from, say, 500 BC, is a collection of city-states, and they were populated by people who were quite diverse. There were traders, there were slaves, people who'd been defeated in war, captured and brought to the city-state. They were perhaps soldiers from other places, women and children, and of course itinerant artists and artisans, itinerant teachers. Come in. Citizens thought that they were in charge of their own destinies. Nisbet, who is the author of a little book called The Geography of Thought, talks about this personal sense of agency. There was a great diversity of opinions and viewpoints brought to the cities by the people from outside, so the need arose for expressing one's own point of view in a way that could make a good case. Drew and Hildebrandt, in their article in 2002 on rhetoric in classical Greece and ancient China, talked about the way that prosecutorial arguments had to be made in courts of law in ancient Greece. Homer, as early as the 8th century BC, described a culture in which a man was defined as much by how he could make a persuasive argument as by his ability to wage war. So this became a strong sense of an important accomplishment in classical Greece. In this culture, people were interested in knowledge for its own sake. The power of the human intellect is its ability to reason, according to the Greeks. They possessed a strong intellectual curiosity about the nature of things and a desire to understand the essential nature of an individual observable entity, such as a rock or a bird or an idea. Underneath the characteristics that something might share with other items would be its own immutable core identity, and reason was the way to arrive at understanding it. So they believed that the truth about something is discoverable through inquiry, and this is a basic principle in Western reasoning today. We think we can uncover the truth about something by our approach, our logic. Greek reasoning, the logic, is the process by which we proceed step by step from one point to another in a linear direction to arrive at a conclusion about something. And usually the method used is a question and answer method, a dialectic method. That is a principle from Aristotle, not only. This also includes an intrapersonal dialectic, talking to yourself, in other words. And the conclusion of the argumentation is the understanding of the core identity of something. So it's a to and fro, back and forth approach. As the process of logic developed, and the way that it's taught to our undergraduates today in critical thinking courses looks like this. First of all, there's a claim. For example, New Zealand tertiary education ranks very high in the world. There's a claim. That's supported by grounds, the evidence. So, for example, the evidence for this claim could be the performance of New Zealand students when they leave New Zealand and enter into other universities. Or it could be something to do with the related fact that literacy is very high in New Zealand, and there's a connection between literacy and performance. The grounds are backed up by warrants, giving credibility to the grounds. So if you say, well, the evidence for how wonderful the New Zealand tertiary education system is the fact that graduates go everywhere in the world and do very well, then the backing for that can be the other universities in the world that accept New Zealand students are very famous and widely recognized. And sometimes the warrants are backed up themselves by historical precedent, by reference to an authority recognized, by personal experience, and so on. This tends to be the way that Westerners feel you can construct a reasonable argument, an argument being a case that you're